Good morning, everyone, and welcome to 50 Acres Academy webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about digital marketing and campaigning and the best platforms to use and some handy hints on how to go about it. We'll be exploring various platforms, various apps, and a whole range of other stuff. It's obviously quite timely because we're in the middle of obviously an election year. Most of the people I think that are going to be listening to us today will be not-for-profits by the looks of the attendee list. So this is sort of more focused towards not-for-profits, but it's equally applicable to people who are working in a corporate or government or any space, really, to be honest. So in terms of where we go, essentially what we're going to cover today is we're going to look at developing your strategy to embrace digital engagement, talk about how to go about that in a sort of a practical way, some of the best platforms to look at using, and what are the current digital marketing and campaigning trends that people are talking about right now. Every week and every day there's seemingly a new app. My 14-year-old constantly tells me that Facebook is now boring and there's a whole lot of other stuff out there and it's always changing and we always are never ahead of the curve, but we can only but try, and we'll try and talk through some of that today. So just for a moment, pause and think about how you consume information. I mean, one of the things that I always say to people is, if you think about, 10 or 15 years ago, we used to, get up in the morning and have a paper delivered to our front lawn, and in the evening we would watch one or two or three news bulletins, depending on how boring and obsessed we were about news. It wasn't that long ago, and I'm not that old, but essentially, the way we're consuming information now has radically transformed, obviously in the last decade in particular, since the advent and take-up of smartphones and mobile devices. Obviously it's a very different landscape, and we've got to think about how we're going to be working with the people who are, consuming the information that we're wanting to send out to the marketplace. No longer are people, reliant on that sort of information. One or two or three capsules of information through the day. The morning capsule for newspapers and breakfast radio, the evening bulletins, and perhaps one or two other touch points through the day. They're constantly consuming information, constantly looking for updates, constantly wanting to be informed. And that might be voluntary or involuntary. They may be seeking that information, or we might be literally imposing it on them. I can recall whenever Twitter first started, however long ago that was, not that long ago, I signed up, because I thought it was the cool thing to do. And I can recall for the first week or so that I used to think that I needed to be reading every single tweet in my Twitter feed. So I would try and remember the tweet that I got up to the day before and then go back and dutifully go through them all. Could you think about if you had to do that with every single platform that we are now consuming? I mean, I'm now reliant on and regularly touch, check in on, Instagram. I have a whole lot of blogs that come to me in Feedly that I look at. I'm looking at Facebook, I'm looking at Twitter, I'm looking at YouTube. There's a whole bunch of stuff that we all look at every day. Can you imagine if we felt duty-bound to look at everything in our feed? We don't, but we do nonetheless consume enormous amounts of information, and people are doing it digitally, and that's how we're seeking reinforcement. We're seeking to be educated about decision making, whether that's about political activism or whether that's about consumer choices. It's a constant in our lives, and we need to think about how we can get involved with that process in those, that big feed, if you want to call it, in your own lives or in everyone else's lives that you're trying to get out to. How do we communicate with those people, and how do we, become a valid source of information and get them involved? I suppose it's in many respects it's the elephant in the room. He's not really in a room. He's outside in what looks like bamboo, perhaps, maybe something else. But if you think for a moment that your organisation or not-for-profit isn't ready, or it can't resource it, or it's too risky, I've heard people tell me, or it just isn't the right time. I've had a lot of people tell me that when I speak to not-for-profit gatherings and other gatherings where I, ask for a show of hands who's got digital assets, who's utilising them. It can sometimes be organisations that are really large, who put up their hands and say, we've got all of the assets, we've acquired them, so someone else can't take them, but we don't really do anything with them. Well, if you think that, then you really need to quickly think differently, I think, because it's a pretty dumb position to be in. And sorry to be so direct, but essentially, if we're not embracing digital engagement and digital campaigning and marketing with our audiences, then we are really pretty stupid, because more and more, almost your entire audience is consuming information in this way for a large part, if not entirely, for some parts of your audience, and certainly significantly, for a lot of them, even people who are perhaps isolated, elderly, from social minorities, different ethnic groups, all sorts of people. Everyone is accessing information digitally. There are, apps for that, for everything, whether it's, Google Translate, you put a photo, you smartphone up to something and translates it into a language that you want it to. There is a way for people to, consume this information, and so we need to really get with that whole thing. Otherwise, we are really being silly. So I think we need to very much better prioritise digital channels to match those consumer expectations. And to some extent, I'll give you some data about it in a little while. There's been a recent report that was reported on in Pro Bono Australia only last week. But, to match those consumer expectations is something that we need to do. And, there's some argument that Australia is really lagging behind some parts of even the region, and indeed certainly Europe and the States to some extent. But in terms of our consumer take-up of digital information, but it's still massive, and we'll show you the stats in a little while. So this is the report that I was referring to, the Public Interest Registry and Non-Profit Tech for Good 2016 Global NGO Online Technology Report. It's really interesting. This obviously covered some NGOs in, parts of Oceania as well. This report actually looked at, it wasn't just about Australia. It was a bigger global report, so you can drill down and have a look at other areas if you're wanting to look it up. But look at the stats there. 94% of not-for-profits or NGOs have a website. A huge amount of them regularly send EDMs or email updates. A lot of them, 3/4, accept online donations. Interestingly, only under 50% regularly publish a blog, which is talking about fresh content. And if you, sort of look around and think about what you're reading, what are you constantly looking for when you're, you know, drilling down and going on those endless online journeys in a spare dull half an hour when you're having a cup of tea? We're looking for fresh content and new content, and that's where blogs come in. And I think there is obviously an opportunity, I think, for not-for-profits to look at improving that statistic. I think there's a great opportunity there to try and match the other levels of engagement. Equally, look at the different use of some of those platforms. Quite a reasonably low Twitter following in comparison to Facebook, and I suppose it depends on what you're trying to do. If you're you're really a community organization and you're not really injecting into any political or opinion former debates, then Facebook may be the place to be. 32,000 subscribers for email is pretty good, but I think 4,500, depending on whether you're large, I mean, this is an average, obviously, is pretty low. And if you look at Instagram, 1,700, again, that's pretty low. And we'll talk about influencers in a minute, but I think Instagram is a great opportunity for us to be able to engage with a broader audience who are wanting to see us through a sort of soft lens and see things to sort of slip past them in a gentle, kind, interesting way, perhaps pictorial, a beautiful, artistic way. And I think we can all perhaps look at Instagram as a possible platform as well. And if you look at the stats on the right-hand side, it is really interesting. Who have an active presence. Obviously, it's very high. Facebook is huge. Twitter is big. And again, there's a real opportunity. People are active on Twitter, but their level of followers are quite small. So I think there is an opportunity to grow that. Again, YouTube, Instagram. I mean, Instagram's a difficult one, I think. Sorry, not Instagram. Sorry, Instagram. Look, I meant to say LinkedIn. Sorry, I think LinkedIn's a difficult one to put your finger on. LinkedIn is more of a personal network, as people know, but I think people often spend a lot of time thinking about their company pages or their organisational pages, and I think to some extent, so that is LinkedIn, the 57% stat in the middle there. And I think there is, it is a difficult one to activate. I think it is a personal engagement platform. It is about networking, and so it is a slightly different one in terms of getting messages across from a not-for-profits perspective. But it is interesting. Again, Instagram at the top right-hand side is at 48%. Quite low, really, in the sense of, I think, a platform that has great potential to be able to reach out to influencers, which we'll talk about in a moment. So I think there's some really interesting material there, and I would urge, if people are looking at this area and trying to understand it a bit more, to have a look at that report. It is actually very interesting. This is a graphic that I borrowed from Pro Bono Australia. So, what is digital marketing and campaigning really good for? People talk about wanting to do it, they need to be on it, they need to be embracing it, but how do we actually get started, and what do we actually do? Sorry, I just had a cup of tea to stop me from coughing. So it's useful for a whole bunch of stuff, really. It's not-for-profits. You're all probably using digital platforms for a whole range of purposes. These are 10 of them. There's a lot more. Fundraising, of course, is absolutely pivotal for most not-for-profits. Recruiting, supporters, stakeholders, third-party supporters, obviously, through a whole lot of different ways. Mobilising people when you've got something to ask them to do, when you're wanting to activate them, it's a great way of getting through to people quickly and effectively. Grassroots campaigning, a great campaign to have a look at if you are interested is Cathy McGowan's campaign in the seat of Indi in Victoria. Some of you may know of it already. It was a great campaign, and it was really interesting. It's fascinating how she used the Nation Builder platform, and really, really communicated to her grassroots supporters in a similar way to how Obama used the same platform, Nation Builder. And again, if any of you are doing any local campaigning where you're needing to mobilize anything from a few hundred to some thousands, Nation Builder is a scalable resource which has a whole range of price points from incredibly cheap for just a few people up to obviously a bit more than that if you're Barack Obama wanting to use it to mobilize the country. Someone's asked me, and do I have any figures on Snapchat? I don't actually have any figures, but I'll talk about Snapchat a bit later. I think it is definitely being taken seriously by NGOs. It's certainly where young people are located, and I don't have any figures, but we will talk about it in a little while as a platform. And again, if anyone has any questions, don't hesitate just popping them up into the question box, and I'll get to them as you pop them up there. Grassroots campaigning, have a look at Nation Builder. We'll talk about that, Nation Builder, and some other platforms later. Advertising, we all know we're looking at advertising. People are trying to get the head around how to make it work, how to drag in, more eyeballs, more downloads, more likes, and we're constantly trying to evolve the way we are doing our advertising and looking at the metrics. There's a lot of apps to look at metrics of digital advertising. There is a whole stack of them out there, from BuzzFeed to Sprout Social to Hootsuite to more native apps to the apps themselves, which actually will give you some quite good metrics. Google, as we know, has a great metric tool that registers web traffic. So, there's a lot of ways of measuring your advertising. Messaging is a great thing that can be done digitally, as we all know, and it's a fabulous tool to get things out quickly to your supporters, out to the broader public through ads, through tweets, through a whole range of different platforms. Influencer outreach. Now, I talked about that a little bit before, and I'm sure people have heard of it before, but it's a new term, if you like, a new buzzword, a new description for talking to people and mobilizing people who aren't maybe your classic ambassadors or your classic vehicles or third-party supporters. They're not the board members. They're not the formal ambassadors that are sort of turn up to events dutifully with their, T-shirts on or appear in ads. It's a little bit more subtle than that. And I think influencer marketing and engagement and outreach is becoming very important to the way we are thinking about engaging with anyone. If you think about the decisions you're taking every day or the people that are influencing you, and maybe I'm a great time waster, but I'm looking at a whole range of people online who give me, reinforce things that I'm thinking, reinforce decisions I'm taking about, traveling or consumer items or whatever it might be. decisions about where I might spend my time, what causes I might get involved with. A lot of people are using what's called influencer outreach to reach further to people to increase that dialogue. So, I'll give you an example. Sam Frost from Bachelorette, or whoever it might be, not necessarily straight up advertising. We're not talking about product placement here necessarily, but someone who is willing to embrace the cause genuinely and take it up in a passionate way. They're not getting paid to do it, although people might ask you to, for money. You're actually really trying to get them engaged in the discussion. You're trying to get them to talk to their followers about what it is you're saying. And so it's about convincing them that what you're saying is important, and getting them to talk about it. It's obviously, we don't always have the budgets to get them to product place, because it's a sort of it's a difficult term to come to grips with in terms of not-for-profits. Product placement isn't what we do. It's not ethical. It's difficult. We're not corporates. We don't have the budgets to pay to have people using our Apple computers in an ad. It's not that sort of thing. It's about people genuinely getting involved and genuinely feeling emotionally attached to what it is you're trying to say. And so it's about reaching out to those people, either through their agents, through directly just communicating with them on, Instagram or, Twitter or Facebook. And eventually, they'll communicate with you, if you're lucky, or just persisting really and trying to get them involved with what you're doing. So that's really influencer outreach, and digital's a great platform to get that happening. We can test people. We can test our messages digitally through using a whole lot of more technical apps, polling, just seeing what resonates in terms of ads, what ads work better, what's getting more hits, what's getting more traction. There's a whole range of ways we can test things using digital platforms. Geographic targeting, we can target things, as we all know, through a number of apps. We can target via Facebook, very, 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 very small areas of geographical areas. We can, the gym that I go to in Canberra targets a very small geographical area of Canberra, and they, target, X, depending what they're saying, X to Y, age bracket, people who also might watch The Biggest Loser, or, follow, interested in health or interested in diet or whatever else. You can really, really geo-target and community target your advertising and your engagement through using a whole lot of different platforms. And obviously, digital platforms allow us to have really rapid response, much more than we used to be able to in a campaign from just using a phone or using the mail. Obviously, people used to, and people, some people still post things out. I'm always amazed when someone tells me that they're, sitting down and they're getting staff to stuff envelopes for 2 days or 3 days, to send it out to their their newsletter out to their 4,000 uh, uh, sort of people on their email list. It surprises me. Some people still think that people will only read things that they're mailed. You have a think about what you read in the mail versus what you read digitally. I think we've all got overload, that's for sure. So I think it's about reaching people effectively and directly and in an impactful way. That's absolutely the case. But I think we are probably missing a beat if we think that the answer is just mailing people stuff. I think that's that the time has gone for that, to be honest. So, how can we embrace digital campaigning in our strategies. Let's have a think about that in a practical way. So I think, like any campaign planning in terms of digital, how you embrace digital in a campaign, it's about planning and goal setting. And so it's about sitting down with your team or with yourself or with your board or with the colleague in the next desk or with your family, whoever it is that you're deriving your sort of levers from and your directions from, and setting about to work out what you want to do. And goal setting, I think, is probably the key to it. You've got to set some specific goals and a timeline to achieve them in. So if someone is wanting to have some specific goals for this year's election, well, we know that the election's probably going to be sometime between June and October. Each day we have different reports. We know it's going to be in the second half of the year. So there isn't a lot of time to get, a huge campaign up and running, but there is certainly enough time to do something quite effective. And so, thinking about what's achievable in that time frame, and what is the timeline by which you're going to be trying to do that. What are the particular milestones that you want to hit along the way? Just saying Facebook followers, enough, more Facebook followers. If you're trying to really, get people to genuinely, change their behavior, do something for you, take up a cause, donate, communicate with their local MP, take up, a cause on your behalf and try and become a supporter, then, you need to specifically work out how you're going to do that. When will that happen? And at what point? And how will you achieve it? It's not just to say, you want more people to talk to their MPs. In around the country. Well, that's a great, lofty, broad goal, but how many people do you think you need? What is something that's going to help convince those MPs to take up that cause? Talk to some other not-for-profits who have had some success in terms of campaigning and engagement. Find out what a critical number looks like. What does that sort of snowball effect look like? How big does it have to be in order to be successful? Now, of course, it doesn't have to be huge. I mean, I'll give you a really good example that I've talked about before, and if any of you sat on any other webinars of mine, you may have heard this story, but a year or two ago, I advised the midwives of Australia, and they came to me and they said, we wanted to try and get all of these different things payable on Medicare. Can you help us? Can we achieve that? And I said to them, well, look, it's unlikely in this current environment that you're going to get any of these taken up, to be honest, by the government in terms of paying for any of this stuff on Medicare. But at the same time, what is it? What else is out there? What else is aggravating you? And came down to the fact that at the next COAG meeting, a month or two later, they were going to all the state and territory premiers and the federal health minister, who was Tanya Plibersek at the time, was going to change a whole lot of the regulatory environment and would prevent them from doing a whole lot of different things. Various midwives, both operating in some hospitals, operating at home births, operating with obstetricians, all sorts of different things. And that really had the potential to really impact on, their ability to function and therefore become undermine them as a group. of practitioners. So what we set out doing was doing something quite simple. It was an email campaign, and we had 17 organisations that came together. There's 17 midwives organisations in Australia, approximately, and they all came together. We wrote a letter to every single sort of state and federal MP. We wrote a letter to every single state health minister and a whole bunch of other people at the state level. We urged them to get in touch with Tanya Plibersek. And so literally just a few days after this had started, I started getting calls from Tanya Plibersek's chief of staff saying, what's going on? What are you doing? I just said, well, it's a democracy. We're fully entitled to do it. And what it did was it really put the wind up the sails of a lot of state MPs and state ministers. They, in turn, said to the federal health minister they couldn't support the changes. They weren't sure of them. And if anyone knows anything about COAG, it really is a sort of a collective decision-making process, and if one or two state ministers back out of something, it usually doesn't go through. So it's actually quite easy in some respects if you can get some disruption to stop something, and we succeeded. And literally for about $2,000 that cost them in terms of that email campaign. So, emails are a really, and digital is a great way of achieving stuff quite quickly. So, obviously when you're planning, you need to understand your strengths and weaknesses. A SWOT analysis, sitting down, having a think about that. What's your operating environment? What is it that's going to help you or hinder you in terms of trying to make a digital campaign successful? What's your staffing levels? What do you need to do to mobilize your campaign? What funding do you need in order to keep it going, to keep it on the road through a certain period, whether that's this year or longer term? What are your competitors out there saying? What are they arguing for? How are they using digital? Are they doing it well? Could you do it better than them? Have a think about that. And that's where it really comes, I suppose, down to the sort of SWOT analysis. How do you get to be part of the voice space in that really effective way? And in terms of planning, be very, very realistic about what you can achieve. You're not going to be able to get 1 million followers in a short period of time, but also don't underplay what you might achieve given some enthusiasm and some hard work in a short space of time. There is a lot of potential, I think, to get something done. So I think that's some things that you need to have a think about in terms of planning. So digital campaign basics. Now, obviously we need to have, a bunch of stuff to start off with. We need to have a central campaign hub, which is usually a website. We need ways to stay in touch with our supporters or our stakeholders, such as emails, Facebook, Twitter, text messaging. You can do mass text messaging now, as you know. There's a whole lot of different platforms and software and apps that allow you to do mass text messaging, online contact, keeping in touch with people, online outreach such as advertising, digital video, Facebook, Twitter, supporter outreach, getting your supporters to proselytize for you. That's when things start to really take off. That's when things start to get serious, when you're getting your supporters to do your work for you. That's the position that you really want to get into. And the use of bloggers, whether that's you writing for other blogs or whether that's guest bloggers coming in and writing for you. That's all about spreading the outreach and spreading your reach and the message that you've got and the reach of that message. So what's the importance of a website? Well, obviously a well-designed, optimized website that allows you to tell your story and provide the evidence to back it up. It needs to be navigable. It needs to be mobile optimized, and I'm sure you all know what that is. But if you're not sure, I'm sure when you look at websites on your mobile phone, you sometimes struggle and you need to have reading glasses in order to see some of them. That's because they're not mobile optimized. Then others that are spring into a different shape, when they're on your mobile, you can get free apps through different website free platforms that you can then modify and customize that are completely optimized for mobile, and they're free. So, there is no excuse not to be able to optimize your website presence for mobile any longer. It really is not a negotiable, I think. You need to keep it updated. That needs resources, but look at things like Nation Builder or WordPress or Drupal. They all have good ways of keeping your website fresh and up to date. Explore the use of tailored content for visitors. As you know, when you sometimes go onto a website that picks up who you are, where you're from, whether you visited them before, you can do that as well if you have the resources to do that in a website, if you're at that position. Utilizing microsites, and I'm sure some of you have already done that or you've heard of it, but a landing page or a different site just for a campaign, which links to your campaign and maybe links to others. It might be a campaign that you're doing jointly with other organizations. Microsites can be a great way of attracting some additional attention for a particular campaign. So I think one of the things that everyone, people, have a hunch that the video is important, but they don't quite know, how important it is. I mean, as I'll get to in just a second, video is absolutely key. As we are all getting, more or unlimited access to data, particularly when Telstra stuffs up and gives us a whole day of free data on Valentine's Day. My son asked me on Sunday, do you think they might do it every Sunday? I wish, but we're all getting access to enormous amounts of data, so we're all looking at video. We need to ensure that video is mobile compatible and that it's responsive. We need to post our videos onto Facebook and YouTube. I mean, for example, you can all establish your own video channel and have that connected to Facebook. Because if you just do it in one or the other, you are missing out on a whole lot of audience that you might otherwise get if you double post. It is a bit tedious, but for the moment, it's something that I think is important to do. So, digital tools checklist. Let's have a think about this for a second. So, what do we need? We need a great website. We need a solid CRM system. How many times have we advised various not-for-profits, corporates, small businesses about CRMs? There are so many of them out there. I've worked with a organisation a year or two ago who had spent something like $1 million on getting a bespoke CRM system written for them, and they'd got into financial difficulty as a consequence. You don't need to do that. There are lots of off-the-shelf CRM systems which are absolutely brilliant, from anything from high-rise through to things that are more complicated that enable you to do all sorts of things within them. So if you are questioning the sort of functionality of your CRM system, have a think about it. Have a look around. There is a great deal of options in the marketplace about that you could be using. Deploy EDMs. We all use email, and I'll talk about email in a minute. But EDMs is a good system that you can address things personally. Dear Sue, dear John. Through the EDM system, through your database, without having to sit there laboriously, emailing each person. It's a really fast way. You can design them to fit in with your brand. There is some disadvantage with using them with some government recipients. Some of their firewalls prevent them from getting EDMs, so that is something to be aware of. That's why I often will send MPs individual emails. It's more time consuming, but it's sometimes the only way that we know that they're definitely getting what we're sending them. It looks less uh, beautifully created. It looks like an honest email. And, in some respects, emails are still incredibly useful and really are probably king in the sense of, one-to-one email, online communications. Have an effective social media integration uh, in place. That might be through Buffer or through Nation Builder. Have a strong email presence. It is highly effective. I mean, if I'm trying to, communicate with, as I said a second ago, with journalists, we really no longer just send out a group email BC'd because my husband, who is a journalist in the press gallery here in Canberra, before Christmas, I remember looking at his phone and his inbox. He had 2,300 and something unopened emails. It's now gone down to under 50. He spent some time. He had a month off, and the poor thing sat there, obviously cleaning it out one day. But journalists get an enormous amount of emails, and if they just see a media release attached to an email or in the body of an email, they may just delete it or ignore it or not open it. What we tend to do is just email directly, "Hi, John," more informally, just getting in touch with you to talk to you about something that we thought you might be interested in, and making it sound like you're talking to them in a personal way. And I think that's often a very good way of approaching a journalist, a stakeholder, an influencer, an MP, whoever it is. I think emails are still very, very highly effective. Mobile device integration, making sure that anything that you can is integrated into a mobile platform. So whether that's your website, whether that's an app, if you've got an app that you can utilize, anything really, it's a very important platform that we absolutely can't ignore. And responsive email templates. There are templates now on the market. There are agencies and website platforms and stuff that you can download online where you can create responsive email templates that will be able to respond more immediately to the information that you're plugging into it. So have a look at that online. It's really quite an interesting innovation. And ensuring that video is mobile, it's compatible and it's responsive. We said that before, but it is very important that mobile is going to work as much as you possibly can make it on all of your different platforms. This is a little kid, obviously, which is trying to indicate that, mobile devices is the thing that's now, dictating what we're doing. I think the figure is it's now very clear that mobile devices are way overtaking desktop traffic in terms of access to platforms. We then have to respond to that. The reality is people are looking at our information on their handheld device, whether that's a phone or a tablet or whatever it is, or an Apple Watch. That's how they're getting our information, and we need to be able to ensure that when we are delivering it to them, it is working. So if they're looking at your information on a mobile, on an Apple Watch, what does it look like? If they're looking at it on their iPhone 6 Plus, what does it look like? If they're looking at it on a Samsung, what does it look like? You need to test this stuff. And, I know for, when we redid our website a couple of years ago, we spent an enormous amount of time working on whether what platforms were working and what platforms weren't working. What can Samsung was Samsung working, or was the iPhone working? Someone's just said to me that they have lost sound. Let me know if you're having problems with that. No one else is saying that to me. Heather, I don't know whether you come back on board. And Amy's asked me, do I think that an organisation should be on all social media platforms or select only relevant ones? It really does, Amy, come down to resourcing. And, you can't be on all platforms. You go mad. You don't have the time. You won't do any other work. You won't talk to your family. You won't do any exercise. That's silly. But I think you need to think about where your tribe is. And it's something that I often say. Oh, great, you're back on, Heather. That's great to hear. The It really depends on what your tribe is. If you're reaching out to young people, adolescents, because that's what your organisation does, well, select the platforms that they're on. Instagram, Snapchat. Um, they're not on the old people's. I mean, a lot of people are on Facebook, but Facebook is now not necessarily the favoured platform of adolescents and teenagers. So you've got, YouTube. YouTube is, they're all watching Netflix. Not that you're going to put anything on Netflix, but YouTube, Spotify, or where are they? Where is your tribe? If they're on Facebook, if you're reaching out to older Australians, Facebook might be the place. So, and again, you can use different apps to work in with those, and so these are integratable. So, YouTube can be integrated with Twitter. Vimeo can be used as a method to communicate and to film. So, a lot of these things can be integrated with one another, and this isn't an exhaustive list. There's thousands of them, but it really does depend on where your tribe is, and I think you need to do some research on where your tribe is. Philip has just suggested a great tool for responsive web design is responsivewebdesignmaster.com. It's on Chrome as a plugin. Okay, responsivewebdesigntester.com is what it is. Thank you very much, Philippa, for that. So, what are some of before we finish, what are some of the trends for 2016? I've categorized them in 4 different areas: people, social, reach, and video, because video is I think, very important. So in terms of reach, people are getting hard to reach. Both in polling, people are turning their phones off or going offline in terms of, not wanting to be reached for polls. People are not really interested in things that are stuck in their letterbox much in terms of an election campaign or other campaigns. Digital is filling the gap, but again, you've got to be responsive, because if you see the same ad every day on Facebook, after that 3rd day, you probably switch off. You're not going to read it. You're not going to think about it. So it's about, changing it, swapping it, making it, zany one day, not boring the next, but, more emotional the next day. It's about mixing it up and grabbing people's attention. The rise of addressable communications. We can personalize communications through a whole lot of ways, including on the phone, SMSs, on tweets, etc., and certainly via email. Talkability is, I think, and this goes on with influencer engagement. How do you increase that talkability of what you're doing? Talkability is not just us talking to each other any longer. Unfortunately, it's not just about having a conversation. It's about how we get it happening online, and it's about reaching out through a variety of different platforms. In terms of social, mobile, as I said, is vital, absolutely vital on all platforms. You need to make sure that they are working, that they can be seen, and you need to test it. one-to-one social media engagement, one of the things that we've done and we've been quite successful at doing is, literally, communicating with people one-on-one. And I'm sure some of you may have tested that out, but literally jumping on and saying to Sam Frost or Koshi or whoever he is, or Wallet Ali's not on Twitter. He's sensible. That's why he's smart. He has more time to think. But whoever it is, we've asked people to engage with something, and you know what? We ask people, and they do it. Not everyone, but people. You communicate with people one on one. You reach out to them as human beings, and unless they're very important, like Justin Bieber, and he doesn't do his own tweets, largely a lot of people are doing their own tweets, and or doing their own posts, and you can actually get through to them. Online advertising is going to continue to be very important. And as I said before, mobile traffic has now overtaken desktop traffic, and it will continue to dominate. Cross-screen reach. So that is when you were on one screen, you were on something on your mobile, and your desktop knows, because you're connected via Google or however you're connected, your screens know that you were interested in something else, and so that people can reach you on whatever platform, whatever device that you're looking at. Data integration, that's the sort of pointy end stuff. It's about making sure that you actually can read your data. What are you getting told? Who is being told, what information? What are they doing as a result of it? What is the call to actions resulting in? What activity can we see? What are the metrics? You really need to map that, and that's becoming more and more important, and there are a whole lot of material out there that you can use to do that. Grassroots campaigning is also embracing digital at a very, very, very local level anywhere in Australia. So, you can't no longer say, we're just out in the bush, or we're just out in the suburbs. We just want to go and talk to people. That's silly, and that's missing a beat, and I think it's something that you do need to embrace. Sorry, I just switched off the page. App adoption will grow as apps can be now indexed by Google. I think people will be taking up the ability to do apps. There's even talk that websites, and I've heard this, talked a lot, and there's a lot of theories about this, that websites will eventually, become extinct, and apps will become more prevalent. I think that's going to take a while. I think we'll probably see a little bit more, I'm not quite sure the market will become so simple, but there certainly is a move for people to be able to interface with you via an app. So if you can afford it, have a think about it. Video ads will certainly dominate. We've talked about how important video is, really is very important. Virtual reality is absolutely emerging. I was just in a meeting last week with a client in Canberra who are using a 4D glasses, and it's a consumer product. It's not a not-for-profit, but it's a consumer product, and someone will be able to come to somewhere to experience something. They'll be wearing glasses. They'll be able to see, hear. They'll have some smells that will sort of be emerging in the room. Wind, light, temperature. It's a bit like going to Disneyland, if any of you have done that, and it's about it is experiential, and those sorts of things are emerging. And if you've got the ability to think about that, it would work very well for certain causes, for example, like asylum seekers, for example, or health, or food, or aging, or really anything that is potentially very emotional. I think is something that would work very well with that experiential advertising. So have a think about that. Google is now offering in-ad videos, and in their ads. That is something to definitely explore. I think it's certainly something to think about. And YouTube is going to continue to dominate. Interesting anecdote. I was away in January, and I was actually in another city in another country, and I was doing a cooking course. And I was actually in France, and there was a fellow there who worked for Google in San Francisco. He was, a bit of a nerd, lovely fellow on his honeymoon, and he was doing the course with us. And he worked for Google in San Francisco, and he worked in the YouTube area. And so I asked him how many people in San Francisco in the YouTube area, were there currently, just in San Francisco. And he said 3,000. So, that's not the rest of the world. That's just San Francisco. So you get an idea of how important, Google how much importance Google is placing on YouTube now that they own it. And so it will continue to dominate as they work out better ways of leveraging it. So, think about how you can engage with it, think about how you can monetize it, think about how you can reach people through it, either free or charging them. So this is hopefully represents how you now feel at the end of the webinar. We have horses where I live on my place. They don't look like that, and I don't have a horse's head that I wear, but it's just to obviously symbolise hopefully how you're feeling now at the end of the webinar and putting some of this stuff into effect in this current year. It's going to be an interesting year, and I think it is incumbent on us to think about ways of communicating effectively and, innovatively and creatively. And we don't have to do it. Yes, I've spoken about some expensive stuff. 4D campaigning is not going to come. 4D campaigning is not going to come cheap. But, there's a lot of stuff you can do really cheaply. And so I think having a think about that. Sorry, Rebecca asked me, am I going to cover Snapchat? Sorry, Rebecca, I didn't address that. I did reference Snapchat in the sense of I think that's where young people are. I'll just briefly talk about it for a second. Snapchat is most definitely where young people are at, and it's a way in which you can communicate one-on-one to someone. You can broadcast. It still requires you getting and generating and increasing, an audience. Like anything, it doesn't come just because you go on the platform doesn't mean they're just going to come. You've got to go out and find them. So you've got to tell people you're there. You've got to go and follow them. You've got to find them. You've got to encourage them to go onto Snapchat as well. I haven't got any statistics on it. I'm sure there is. But I do think if particularly you're trying to communicate with adolescents or, teenagers and young people, it's certainly a place to be. I should have my 14-year-old son on here as a consultant because he would be able to probably tell us more, but there you go. So thanks so much for joining us. We've gone a little bit over time. My apologies. The next webinar is on Tuesday, March the 22nd. At 11 o'clock. We're going to think about the federal budget, which is coming up in May. And if you haven't given it any thought, it's probably time to think about it. And, just preparing those last few months in terms of what you might say, who you might say it to, how you run media and around the budget, and the run up to the budget, on the evening itself, and on the week after the budget. So that's what we're going to address next time. I hope you can join us, and thank you very much for joining us today. And I hope you have a great day and a great week. Thanks so much.